Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the United She Stands podcast. Today, we have another great Ohio candidate who is running for the Ohio House, District 7, which is where I live. And you'll hear just a funny little story about how I realized that later in this interview. But we today are talking to Zach Rossfeld. Again, he is running for the Ohio House in District 7, and he is a dad and a doctor who's running for quality funded schools and for healthcare that puts people first. A lifelong Ohioan, he and his wife Kara are raising 2 children and a puppy in Clintonville. Dr. Rossfeld sees patients as an associate clinical professor of internal medicine at Ohio State, and until his campaign had served as an assistant medical director for Ohio Medicaid. He understands what it takes to be an effective policymaker and has a track record of shaping large programs to help everyday Ohioans. With his 2 young children in public schools and his patients struggling to get the care they deserve, Dr. Rossfeld knows that we all deserve better. And that's why he's running for state representative for the public good. We had a great conversation with Zach, and we think you all will enjoy it too.
Hi, Zach. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, so happy to have you. So let's just start with a little bit about yourself. You introduce yourself as dad, doctor, Democrat. Which of those identities most shaped your decision to run for state rep, and why are you running right now?
Yeah, dad is certainly who I am, right? I happen to be a doctor. It's what I do. And being a Democrat certainly maps to my values, right? I think a lot about work-life balance, and that always struck me as a little off. And I picked up the term some years ago of work-life integration. That just made a lot more sense to me, right? Being our whole selves, no matter what door we walk through. So I'm certainly all of those things in my work, but it's, of course, so dependent on the context and the room. But I really have set this intention from the very beginning to be a dad who happens to be a doctor instead of the other way around. It all filters through family first. But I'm also hearing you ask, why now? And I don't think for big, important things like this, I would be surprised if anybody ever truly feels ready, right? And as a #girl dad, of all things, the line from Moana is kicking around in my head that the call isn't out there at all. It's inside me, right? I'm not running because it's true, right? I'm not running because somebody recruited me. I'm here because I know what is coming to the cuts from Medicaid, from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? And I grieve the school board meetings I watch as Columbus City Schools is projected to be insolvent by 2030. And so honestly, heeding that sense of duty to do the most good I can, ask for advice, talk to my family, talk to my employer, and petitions in September.
That's awesome. I feel like Ashley and I have heard from a lot of candidates for this upcoming election in November or even in May. And a lot of folks are saying I'm not a career politician. I just want to make a difference. I see what's happening and I'm mad about it. And I want to be a part of the change. And I think that is just getting me so excited. And I'm speaking for Ashley too. We're so pumped about everyone we're seeing. And so I think, I don't know, you're not alone in kind of your reasoning for running, and it's super refreshing to see. So we're just excited to hear about it. So specifically, let's talk about your doctor title. You have practiced medicine at Ohio State and has served as assistant medical director for Ohio Medicaid. So I know you kind of alluded to it, but can you talk more about what you've seen inside the system that made you realize change has to happen at the state house when it comes to healthcare?
Yeah, I'm not breaking news on this podcast that our healthcare system is broken, right? I'm trying to think of the most relatable analogy to what it's like. And I was thinking about trying to run a restaurant. Not that I've ever done that, but you can imagine having your menu all set, your appetizers, your entrees, your drinks, your desserts, but there's no prices on it anywhere, right? And people come in because they need you. They're hungry. And can you imagine for a second if everybody's credit card had different rules on whether and how much they're going to pay? It's just completely asinine how, and purposefully, for how shameful the profit motive in healthcare is, how inefficient and expensive the system is. And without a single payer, there's just no way around that in terms of the system. right? But what have I seen in that system? Man, I really every day see this workforce of compassionate frontline clinicians, especially nurses and social workers who are just trying to do right by the single patient in front of them, and yet have to deal with all these headaches of prior authorizations for obviously necessary care, and often are made to apologize to their patients for what the system is, right? And, I've seen us on our best days too, right? I have resuscitated newborn babies from blue and limp to pink and perfect. And healthcare is a team sport. I see the way that we gather to celebrate when somebody gets to ring the chemo bell, right? And I also see the way that we gather to honor somebody who's being wheeled to say donate their organs, right? We do all of that as a team. But on the whole, people are tired. I think the public is terrified of the costs and sadly are less trusting of the medical science, right? It's not great. But we know that it can be, right? There are those moments. We have incredible science, we have incredible abilities, and it's a tremendous source of employment and self-worth for a lot of people in the field.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So specifically, if you go to the State House, can you tell us a little bit about how having a physician, I know there's actually a few in the State House, but having another physician, we've kind of been joking on the show this year that like doctors are trying to save Ohio because there's so many doctors running. So having another doctor at the State House, how would that change how healthcare policy gets written in the state?
Yeah, I don't know how aware people are that Medicaid by budget and by touch of our citizens is the biggest thing our state government does, right? It's essentially 40 to 50% of the entire state budget is the Medicaid program. It's a core responsibility of what Ohio does. And it's not some inner city only stereotype program. This is 1 in 4 Ohioans, and it's half of births in the state, right? So this idea that Medicaid is some thing, when it comes to the state budget, it's everything, right? And I'm glad you mentioned, physicians in the legislature. I would be remiss to not mention my public endorsement by Senator Beth Liston. I've had the chance to be her student going back to medical school, and she's one of one. And other conversations, of course, with Representative Samani on the Democratic side, and of course, the 2 Republican senators that are physicians as well. What I'm going to bring is, of course, a trust in science, and the practice of medicine, if anything, is humbling. So I have learned to say, I don't know, and I'm not sure, and let me ask somebody about that. Right? It's that team sport idea. So asking other experts is core to how I'm going to approach policy. And speaking of policy, environmental policy is health policy. Education policy is health policy. These things are not separate, right? They all go in to who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. And you've said in your campaign that Ohio should start with its children. And I actually really love this perspective. So if elected, what are some first concrete steps that you would take to strengthen childcare and fully fund public education in our state? As we know, there's a lot going on there in Ohio.
Yeah, there is. And, I think one of the benefits to a state legislature is that you've got 49 other examples to learn positive and negative from, right? The labs of the states. We don't have to look too far. Kentucky's doing a great thing, state sponsoring childcare costs for childcare workers. This is already driving success. And you think of it as like a labor supply policy. A lot of childcare centers, granted, there are other reasons they are closing and under threat for other reasons, but a lot of it has to do with staff retention and turnover. And think of the low wages that many childcare workers are paid. So regardless of family income, subsidizing free the child care for childcare workers is a proven policy to lead to more bandwidth and really honor, let's be serious, the women doing that work.
Yeah, I think childcare is such an important thing. It impacts so many, to your point, so many things, especially the economy. It impacts the way we care for the future generation and the way we take care of women, for sure.
There's no do-overs when it comes to child development. You get one shot.
Nope. Yeah, absolutely.
Great point.
Yes. I think about that all the time as my kids growing up. I'm like, well, hope that went well because that was a real impression I probably just left there. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about public education. So, as a public school graduate yourself, you are raising kids in the Columbus City schools, as you mentioned. Talk to us just a little bit about the state of public education in Ohio. Like, what are lawmakers doing? What do they misunderstand about what it really takes to fund our public schools?
Well, I don't think they're misunderstanding anything, right? I think the evidence is very clear, dating to the Cleveland scholarships in the 90s and the slow growth. This has been a strategic undermining of public education as a public good. And I really don't think that's debatable at this point. There's the great, it was published in the New Yorker and ProPublica, On a Mission from God. And it was so interesting to go back to Governor Voinovich and the diocese. It referenced my home of Allen County with, Speaker Huffman. So again, I don't think that's misunderstood. I think it's, to be honest, weaponized against what should be a core public good. Right, there's 1.5 million public school students in this state. Almost 9 in 10 kids go to a public school, and we're doing a complete disservice to be underfunding and under prioritizing. Like we mentioned, you only get one shot. I think there's broad expert agreement about the Fair School Funding Plan. Right, they took something like 3 years. These are not consultants flown in from some coast. These are superintendents and treasurers in the state of Ohio who sat down in a bipartisan way and said, how much does it actually cost to educate a student? And we're not talking like all the AP courses and the fanciest art supply. We're talking vanilla education. Just what does it cost, right? Let's start there, because we can read the history of unconstitutional and under. Where do we start? And it was starting with the Fair School Funding Plan. The pieces of it now, right? We are basing our costs on what things cost in 2021 based on the current budget, right? And of course, they account for inputs based on the relative wealth of a district. But what goes underappreciated, in my opinion, for the Fair School Funding Plan are the categorical inputs. That means, what is special? What are your relative needs as a district? The Columbus City School District has 22% English learners. 19% of Columbus City school students have an IEP, right? All costs are not the same.
That's interesting. I didn't know that the 22% are English learners in Columbus City schools. That's actually fascinating. Huh.
Yeah, it really frames the need in a real way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, let's talk about vouchers.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about, was the funneling of funds to the voucher programs. Could you talk about that a little bit?
You mean the unconstitutional voucher program in Ohio? Thank you, Judge Page. Having read all 47 pages of that opinion, there's just some fascinating pieces to it, right? Judge Page here in Franklin County had the foresight to put a stay on her own order. So she ruled that they're unconstitutional, and recognizing that the next school year is about to start, and of course, the state was going to appeal. I just think that's really brave and considerate in a pragmatic way to rule unconstitutional and say, and we'll see where this goes, right? I think that's a recognition of a check and balance in a real way between branches of government in our state. I'm following closely, of course, as mentioned, the state appealed and head into the 10th Circuit. We'll see in terms of the final adjudication. But when I think about the House District 7 I'm running for, right? The average amount of money that the state is funding a student in the Upper Arlington schools is less than $1,000. And the maximum amount in the voucher program is $8,000, right? Took a very qualified judge to say that that's not right. But I think the public knows it isn't either.
Yeah, that is, we've talked to a lot of candidates about vouchers, and I feel like every time I talk about it, I learn something new, a new piece. And of course, each new piece just pisses me off more and more. It's wild.
It's so intentional, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just so intentional of undermining public education. If you try to really examine the publicly available information, there's no more detail than 200% of federal poverty level. That's what they define as low income, high income. But they're paying a higher than minimum amount in vouchers up to 451% of the federal poverty level. There's no accounting for the billions of dollars with a B. I know it gets confusing when we talk about millions and billions of this, but there's zero accounting. We have no idea where these dollars are going. And back to Judge Page's opinion, The dollars are going directly from the state treasury to the schools. What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know what I just put together? I don't know why it took me this long because this is like the typical playbook, but it's underfund, 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 say it's not working, need to move everything to privatization. That's the typical GOP playbook. And so it's like, it's kind of wild that I just put this together. And I think it's because I've always viewed this attack on education as like, obviously a way to control what's being taught and other things like that. But I think that's also part of it, right? It's always about that, taking away a public service or good so they could privatize it and make it a for-profit situation.
Yeah.
So
I think
I don't
that's a
know why
really
it just
helpful.
really clicked for me when you're talking about it now. I can't believe I never thought about it before that way.
I want to even build on that. If you contrast education and healthcare, Medicare, traditional Medicare for 65 plus is single payer healthcare. The federal government does not have tens of thousands of employees to process all the claims. And so they outsource that. They privatize only the processing of claims. We don't need to do anything like that for a public good like education, right? I have such pride in my high school. And I know that's just part of being an Ohioan, right? Is you identify with your local school. There is no need from a workforce infrastructure standpoint to give this away from being a public good to privatize. It's just not necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're all three products of public education here, which by the stats of 9 out of 10 kids in Ohio go to public school makes sense. But yeah, we totally agree. It's a huge, huge issue in Ohio. Another big issue, not really just in Ohio, but we're going to talk about it specifically for Ohio and District 7, is affordability. And you say that, it's not about magically lowering prices. Unfortunately, as much as we wish we could snap our fingers and make some magic happen, that's just not the reality. It's about raising wages, like you say. So what would be, in your opinion, a livable minimum wage, and what does pay transparency mean for working families in the 7th district?
And these are the most important questions for families trying to navigate daily life, right? And I get so worried that affordability somehow gets lost as this like buzzword, right? We talk about egg prices, but we're talking about, again, navigating daily life. And if you look at minimum wage, this is another example in Ohio of a really, really cool right that we have of direct ballot measures. 2006, it was the citizens who said, let's index minimum wage to inflation, right? And we continue to do that. You know what we could also add to that formula to index it to? We could add wage growth. We could add housing costs, right? Not just the basket of goods consumer price index, but the everyday costs that we all have, right? How much does the roof over our heads cost? And how much are wages going up or not, right? We can add those things into the minimum wage formula. Absolutely. You also bring up something I'm following and really thinking a lot about at the state level around wage transparency. This is that job interview back and forth of, in some examples, requiring the employer to list how much the job pays. What this has been shown to do, and I think this is incredibly important, a little more than rising wages, it's closed a gap, especially for women in the maternity tax, right? The return to workforce. So the outcomes of where these transparency laws have been implemented, one of the best outcomes, again, is equalizing pay. We've had the policy for a while where an employer can't ask you what you were paid at your last job, right? And that pushes the floor, but this is a two-way street to raise the ceiling at the same time.
No, I'm so glad you talked pay transparency. I feel like I haven't heard a candidate talk about that. And I think Colorado has it, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, I think I know they do because my husband has where he works, there's a corporate office here and in Colorado. And because of that, they do pay transparency across that company.
Yeah.
And I
think of the example from strong unions, right? Prevailing wage laws. This is an efficiency gain all around. When people are able to plan, unions are able to, the employers are able to plan when there's a clear public sense of what wages will be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did, especially I like the pay transparency a lot because of the gender gap it does close.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I really love that. Okay, let's go back to a healthcare topic since we do have you here. You're a doctor. Ohioans enshrined reproductive rights in our Constitution in 2023. From your viewpoint, as a doctor and soon to be hopefully a policymaker. Where do you see the biggest threats to those protections playing out in our state right now?
Yeah, Ashley, I'm just loving the way you frame this again. It's passed, not the Ohio legislature, Ohioans, right? 57% of us at the ballot box. And it's Article 1, Section 22 of like our constitutional Bill of Rights, right? I think we know about freedom of speech in our federal Bill of Rights. Our Ohio Bill of Rights lists abortion, right? And may it always be so. What is not in that language is the rest of needed care, right? So I think a lot about fertility issues, right? This is something certainly impacted people I love, right? This is not a rare thing. But think of the issues with private equity buying up fertility practices and just cost prohibitive care to do what is most important to many couples, right? Grow a family. So I think that cost piece is something where regulation is very much needed. I'm also incredibly frustrated about HB 324. So this was a marathon session right before the House left for like the holiday break. It was late November. And House Bill 324, I can go on for a while on this, you guys. They call it the patient.
We're here for it.
The Patient Protection Act, which I don't know, sounds a lot like the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. So the naming itself is even disingenuous of trying to steal this idea of patient protection. But this is the bill that is essentially aimed at limiting mail-based, telehealth-based abortion pills, right? And I remember where I was when I read the bill text for the first time, because it requires the director of health to come up with certain policies. If a medication 5% of the time causes, among the things, death or sepsis. Can you imagine if you went to the doctor and they're like, there's a 1 in 20 chance this is going to kill you? We would never, ever do something like that. Like, I can appreciate their strategy to undermine abortion access rights in some way, right? Of course that's going to happen. But when I read this bill, I'm just like, this makes zero sense in the real world.
Like, doesn't that even, I think I was reading something where it said like antibiotics like can fall into that kind of like probability. Yeah. Like,
it's something like insurance claims, FDA data. I'm so worried that they're going to come up with some fake source of data that seems reputable that forces some action. That bill actually, of course, passed the House, unfortunately. So watching that in the Senate Health Committee.
Yeah, our supermajority GOP controlled state house. I'm sure it will go well in the committee and onto the floor.
Yeah, we don't need to wait for the threats. They already exist, and it's passed the House.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's really alarming to see how many ways they're trying to limit and take our rights away that, as you said, 57% of Ohioans voted for. Oh, I remember that day fondly. Ashley and I were doing cartwheels in a local brewery when we were watching the results come in.
Such a great brewery. I've been actually waiting to bring this up.
Great.
You're in Clintonville, right, Zach?
That's right.
I've been to Derive. I'm not
okay.
Close, but my friends, when I go down, that's like one of their favorite places, and they take me to Derive. I've been several times.
I'm glad to hear that.
I love Derive. They have really great hazy IPAs. So anywhere that has good hazy IPAs, I am in. But yeah, so you're in Clintonville. I'm in Grandview. You are running for the 7th district, which I didn't know when we first met. I'm admitting it on my own political podcast, whatever. I mixed up
all
my
politics is local, Sarah. All politics is local.
The text I got after this event was so funny, Zach. So she's texting me or whatever, and then I
think her voice note, and mid-voice note, I realized this.
No, didn't I say, like, I think the 7th district is like Russo's old district. That's your district. And then
no,
like,
I was talking.
Okay, I couldn't remember how we did it. Yeah, she's like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I met Zach. I didn't even know it's my district. It was hilarious. I was laughing pretty good at her. So
I'm like, this guy's not going to come on our podcast. He thinks I'm a fake.
Sarah doesn't even know anything about Ohio.
There's so many district numbers, and I'm just always thinking Joyce Beatty. Yeah, and and redistricting and all of that. But anyways,
we just changed the lines. We changed the numbers.
Yeah. So, yes, you are running for a state rep in my district, and you are not the only one in this Democratic primary. So, can you kind of share how you may stand out against your competitors?
I think more than anything in this race, I feel proud to be offering choice. On my own ballot, frequently it feels kind of pre-selected and I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to do, but it feels constrained. I'm also running in a partisan Democratic primary, right? I share the core values with the other people running. And so even framing as an opponent feels wrong in some way. And I'm, of course, not going to speak for them. I am just laser focused on the role of the state legislature, right? Amy Acton appointed me to an advisory role 6 years ago. I served 4 years in the state Medicaid program. I've been at the $1 billion table. Our team, with the cuts coming from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, compressed 6 months of work into 6 weeks to keep a couple $1 billion flowing before it gets cut off by the Trump administration, right? And I know the Columbus City Schools logo on the lanyard that my daughter wears, right? And I know the budget forecast. So this is me trying to do the most good I can, of course, for my family, but also for my patients.
Yeah. Well, Zach, I just want to say thank you for running. To your point, it is great to have choice on the ballot. That's really healthy for democracy. It makes candidates better. It makes our parties better. So thank you for running. And thank you for the sacrifice, because you're a doctor and you're a dad and you're a little bit busy, like living your life. So this takes time and energy and weekends and evenings. And that's time spent away from your children and your family. So thank you for running.
We'll reflect that thanks to you. You guys are continuing to offer a service to this democracy, right? Personalizing candidates and making it approachable for people. That's important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. All right. We always like to end with a little bit of hope. So can you tell us what is giving you hope right now?
I actually think about hope a lot, right? I'm a hospice and palliative care doctor. It comes up. And one of the things that I've learned that's just so true is it's important to hope for many things. Big hopes, little hopes, secret hopes, ones you tell everybody that you know. And I look at the map, right? This is not, as much as I wish it were different, a purple presidential state anymore. It's not. But it's certainly not a 65-34 state house, right? So I think of this geography problem and the redistricting. It didn't go the way we hoped. I appreciate that. But I am hopeful because a majority of school districts, a majority of the 607 school districts in the state of Ohio are participating in Vouchers Heard Ohio. This is not a red-blue issue. This is a core public good, public education issue. And that gives me a lot of. I'm also hopeful because Amy Acton's on the ticket, right? America's 250 years old in July. Ohio just turned 223. I think it's time we had a woman be our governor, right?
I think so too.
And, I'm like young, old or old, young, right? And so there's certainly like technology that's new, and just seeing like the exuberance and knowing that our continued pace of discovery and implementation in Ohio, that gives me hope, right? Like solar panels used to be this like the most expensive thing in the world, right? Well, fast forward 20 years and now utility scale solar is a win-win-win, right? So there are so many reasons to be hopeful. I think it's imperative that we don't talk about, that we need to also talk about our worries, right? Hopes and worries, you need to have both, but you also need to hope for more than one thing.
Yeah, we totally agree. I love the big hope, little hope, secret hopes.
Yeah. I hope my coffee's hot. I hope, my shower's hot. But it's like you got to frame it differently sometimes.
Yeah. I love that. Well, we are excited about your run, and we hope that our listeners will be as well. And so if they are, how would you tell them to help your campaign? What are some ways they can do that?
I think word of mouth is the end all be all, right? What are we here for if not each other? And if somebody you trust, somebody in your orbit vouches for something, I think that's what it's all about. So if you've crossed paths with me, if you've been to webackzach.com and seen me running around the 7th House District, tell somebody. I think word of mouth is where it's at.
Yeah. Yep. Love that, especially local politics. We will have all of your links to your social medias, your website, all that in the show notes so folks can find you. Zach, thank you again for the time today and for stepping up to run for office.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the conversation. Let's make Ohio great.
Yes. Yep. I love it.